The summer of 1992 began with sunlight and uncertainty. America was changing. The Cold War had ended, the Berlin Wall had fallen, and the world was beginning to breathe differently. But in that pause between conflicts, something else stirred, not in politics or diplomacy but on a hardwood floor. Basketball, once just an American game, was spreading through streets, schoolyards, satellite broadcasts. In the small towns of Spain, in the alleys of Croatia, in the gyms of Lithuania, boys wore faded NBA jerseys, dreaming of a sport that had crossed oceans. But for the United States, the birthplace of the game, there was a problem. Pride had been wounded. 4 years earlier, in Seoul 1988, the U.S. men's basketball team, a group of college players, had lost bronze. For most nations that was glory. For America it was humiliation. They had invented the game, exported it to the world, and now the world had beaten them at it. It wasn't just defeat. It was an awakening. The Olympic Committee changed the rules. From 1992 onward, professional players, NBA players, would be allowed to compete. No more amateurs. No more excuses. If the world wanted the best, they would get it. And so, for the first time in history, the United States decided to send its gods instead of its disciples. They called it the Dream Team. No name was ever more accurate. Magic Johnson, the showman, the heartbeat of the 1980s. Larry Bird, the stoic assassin from Boston, playing through pain and pride. Michael Jordan, the new king, ruthless, untouchable, the man who had turned basketball into a global religion. And around them, Barkley, Malone, Stockton, Pippen, Ewing, Robinson, Drexler, Mullen, Lettner. 12 men. 12 legends. Together they were not a team, they were mythology wearing sneakers. When the roster was announced, the world paused. Reporters wrote that it was unfair. Coaches from other countries joked that they would play for second place. Even the NBA stars themselves could hardly believe it. In that locker room, egos collided like planets. Jordan versus Magic. Bird versus Barkley. Legends from rival dynasties now sharing a single jersey, USA stitched across the chest. And yet, beneath the pride there was something else. Curiosity. What would happen if perfection stood side by side? Could greatness cooperate? In San Diego they met for the first time. Television crews gathered outside the gym. Inside, sweat dripped, sneakers squeaked, laughter echoed. The greatest collection of talent in sports history was running layup drills. It felt absurd and sacred. Magic Johnson looked around at his teammates and smiled. "Guys," he said, "this is like playing basketball with God." They trained hard but not too seriously. After all, who could challenge them? Their first scrimmage was against a group of college all-stars, kids barely old enough to vote. No one expected competition. But when the whistle blew, something unthinkable happened. The kids played without fear. They ran fast, pressed hard, and shot freely. And they beat the Dream Team. The pros were stunned. Egos burned. For the first time the gods bled. Jordan sat in silence. Magic barked orders. Bird, injured and stiff, glared. Then they regrouped. The next day they played again, and destroyed the college kids by nearly 100 points. They didn't need a reminder twice. From that moment they became more than a roster. They became a storm. By July the Dream Team boarded a flight to Barcelona. On the runway flashbulbs exploded like fireworks. Reporters shouted names: Jordan, Magic, Barkley. They smiled, waved, and walked into history. Spain awaited them with open arms and open mouths. When their plane landed, the tarmac was lined with fans, journalists, and soldiers. For the Spanish public, it wasn't the arrival of a sports team. It was the arrival of celebrities, supernovas of culture. Some players said it felt like the Beatles had landed. Others said it felt like the moon landing. Wherever they went, restaurants, hotels, practice courts, crowds followed. Police escorted their buses. Children climbed fences just to catch a glimpse. Even other Olympians lined up for autographs. Opposing teams asked for photos before games. They weren't just admired, they were worshipped. But beneath the glamour they worked. Coach Chuck Daly knew how fragile greatness could be. Too many stars, too much pride. He reminded them, "You're not here to prove who's best among you. You're here to show the world what basketball looks like when played right. And they listened. For once, egos bowed to purpose. Jordan set the tone, no jokes, no shortcuts. Every scrimmage was war. Every practice a test of hierarchy. Magic led with voice, Bird with silence, Jordan with fire. By the end of camp, no one doubted who ruled the court. Even Magic, grinning, admitted, "It's Michael's league now." The Olympic Village was chaos when they arrived. Athletes from every nation packed into small apartments, eating together in canteens, sharing buses. But the dream team didn't stay there. Security concerns forced them into a luxury hotel outside the city, with guards, private dining, and fans camping on sidewalks below. They lived like royalty. Every day, thousands gathered just to watch their bus pass by. Cameras flashed. Flags waved. The world had never seen anything like it. At practice sessions, photographers from 50 countries filled the bleachers. Even their warm-ups drew cheers. Reporters wrote that the dream team didn't play basketball, they performed it. Every pass, every dunk, every smile was a piece of theater. The first game came against Angola, a small, proud African team that had trained for years just to be there. When they stepped onto the court and saw the Americans, they couldn't hide their awe. During the warm-ups, one Angolan player asked for a picture with the U.S. captain. The crowd laughed kindly, but no one judged. Even the dream team smiled. Then the game began, and mercy ended. The U.S. played like a symphony of violence and grace. Fast breaks that blurred. Passes that looked choreographed. Barkley, unstoppable, muscled his way through defenders like a tank with wings. By halftime, the score wasn't close. By the final whistle, it was historic. But no one cared about the numbers. Everyone cared about the spectacle. Even the defeated Angolan players smiled, clapping their opponents on the back. They had lost to gods, and were proud of it. Game after game, the pattern repeated. Croatia, Germany, Brazil, Puerto Rico. Each team came hopeful, each left humbled. Yet none walked away ashamed. There was honor in being part of the show. For the first time, defeat felt like participation in history. Reporters began calling it the greatest exhibition of basketball ever played. Opponents began calling it a masterclass. And the world began to understand that this wasn't arrogance, it was artistry. The dream team wasn't there to crush. They were there to demonstrate. Between games, they wandered Barcelona like tourists, eating paella, laughing, taking pictures with fans. Barkley caused headlines by sneaking out at night to mingle with locals. Jordan played golf for hours. Magic posed for endless photos. Bird, stoic and hurting, watched quietly from the sidelines, his back nearly broken but his pride intact. They were untouchable but human. And the world loved them for it. In the semifinals, they faced Lithuania, a nation newly freed from the Soviet Union, wearing uniforms funded by the Grateful Dead. The Lithuanians played with passion, almost reverence. They knew they couldn't win, but they played like men reclaiming their freedom. The Americans noticed. After the final whistle, both teams embraced. It wasn't competition, it was communion. Basketball had become more than a sport. It had become a bridge. When the gold medal game came against Croatia, the outcome was inevitable. The Americans led from start to finish. But something remarkable happened in the stands. Fans from every country, Spain, France, Russia, even Croatia, cheered for them. Not because they wanted them to win, but because they wanted to witness it. When the buzzer sounded, when confetti rained, when the flag rose, it wasn't domination. It was revelation. The dream team had shown the world what human potential looked like when ego served excellence instead of devouring it. They didn't just win gold. They redefined glory. That night, on the balcony of their hotel, the 12 men looked out over Barcelona. The Mediterranean stretched silent under moonlight. Some laughed, some drank, some said nothing. Magic looked at Jordan. "You know," he said, "we might never see anything like this again." Jordan nodded. He didn't smile. He knew Magic was right. Perfection never repeats itself. They arrived in Barcelona like a storm made of light. The sun hit the tarmac and reflected off their white and blue warm-ups, cameras flashing, security pushing crowds back as the team walked in a slow, casual line. People screamed their names like movie stars, not athletes. They waved, smiled, and disappeared into the buses waiting to take them to the hotel. The streets were lined with people waving small flags. To the world, this was not a basketball tournament, it was an event in history. They were the faces of America at its loudest, its brightest, its most confident. Inside the bus, the players joked, laughed, and looked out at the sea of people pressing against the windows. Charles Barkley leaned back and said, "Man, they love us." Magic laughed. Jordan didn't. He was already thinking about the first game. At practice, everything was filmed. Cameras followed them everywhere, even into the locker rooms where they changed, taped their ankles, and talked quietly before stepping out. The court was surrounded by journalists from every continent. They didn't need commentary, the sound of sneakers on hardwood was enough. It was the sound of dominance. When they played, the world forgot to breathe. There were no close games. No miracles from the other side. Only perfection repeated again and again. The ball moved like electricity, no dribble wasted, no pass unsure. Jordan and Pippen on the wings, Magic directing traffic like a conductor, Bird standing in the corner, his body broken but his mind sharp enough to see every opening before it existed. Barkley smashed through defenses, his body all force and rhythm. Stockton and Malone ran plays they'd rehearsed for a decade. Robinson floated at the rim like a machine built for elegance. It was not basketball anymore. It was something cleaner, higher. After the first game, the newspapers didn't bother printing scores. They printed adjectives: flawless, untouchable, divine. The world had never seen such unity of skill. Teams who played against them asked for autographs. Coaches smiled when they lost. The humiliation people expected turned into admiration. And inside that admiration was a strange, beautiful truth. The dream team made everyone else want to be better. In the evenings, they walked through Barcelona's old streets. Locals stopped eating to applaud. Fans trailed them on scooters. Cameras flashed like lightning in the night. Jordan rarely spoke. Magic did most of the talking. Bird just nodded, his back aching, his eyes distant. He had come knowing it was his last dance. Each night he took ice baths and said nothing about the pain. He didn't need to. Everyone knew. In quieter moments, the players talked about what they were seeing. The crowds, the flags, the hunger. They realized this was more than sport. It was a transmission. Kids in Spain wore their jerseys. Men from countries they had never heard of shouted their names. The game they thought belonged to America now belonged to the world. Charles Barkley, with his mischievous grin, summed it up best. "We're global, baby," he said, holding up a newspaper written in a language he couldn't read. The gold medal game came as expected. The Croatians played bravely, shooting without fear, running the floor as if chasing ghosts. But the Americans were inevitable. By halftime, it wasn't a contest. The final minutes felt like a coronation. When the buzzer sounded, confetti rained and the entire crowd, not just Americans, stood up and clapped. It wasn't applause for victory. It was gratitude for witnessing something pure. On the podium, as the anthem played, the players looked at each other. Magic, Bird, Jordan, 3 eras of basketball standing shoulder to shoulder. The camera zoomed in on Jordan's face. He wasn't smiling. He looked almost solemn, as if aware of the weight of it all. They had not only reclaimed gold. They had completed a transformation. Basketball would never be the same. When they returned home, America greeted them like conquering heroes. Parades, talk shows, magazine covers. Their faces were everywhere. But what they didn't realize yet was that they had changed more than sport. They had changed the world's imagination. In Europe, gyms filled overnight. In Africa, kids started dribbling on dirt courts. In Asia, basketball replaced soccer in schoolyards. In South America, the sound of bouncing balls echoed in streets where no one had played before. The world had watched the dream team and decided, we want that. And so it began. The global era of basketball. The seeds of every international star who would come later, Dirk Nowitzki, Manu Ginobili, Yao Ming, Luka Doncic. All of it started there in Barcelona, under that Mediterranean sun. For the players, life went on. Jordan returned to Chicago, ready to chase another championship. Magic, fighting his own battles, found peace in what he had just lived. Bird retired soon after, walking away quietly as he had always planned. Barkley smiled through interviews talking about his nights out in Spain. The others faded back into the rhythm of the NBA, but something had shifted. They were no longer just athletes. They were ambassadors of an idea, that greatness, when shared, multiplies. Years later, when journalists asked them what they remembered most, none mentioned the gold medal. They spoke of practice. Of that first scrimmage in San Diego. Of the bus rides filled with laughter and teasing. Of Bird's silent strength, of Jordan's relentless drive, of Magic's leadership that turned chaos into harmony. Magic said, "We were more than a team. We were a statement." Jordan said, "We didn't play to win. We played to show the world how it's done." Time did what time always does. It turned the dream team into myth. Documentaries, books, endless replays of those perfect games. But myths have a danger: they can make real men disappear behind their own legend. The truth is, those 12 men weren't gods. They were humans at their peak, aware that they were standing on a once-in-history moment. They were competitors, friends, rivals, brothers. They laughed. They argued. They doubted. They inspired. And when the lights went out, they left something behind that no one could measure. Every Olympic team that came after them chased the ghost of 1992. None ever quite reached it. Because that year the stars aligned: talent, timing, purpose, unity. It wasn't just skill. It was destiny. If you close your eyes and imagine that summer, you can still hear it. The squeak of sneakers, the echo of the ball hitting hardwood, the roar of a crowd seeing perfection for the first time. You can see Jordan rising for a dunk that seemed to pause time. You can feel the electricity in the air when Magic and Bird passed the ball back and forth like two magicians who knew the spell would soon end. And when the anthem played, when the flag rose, the moment crystallized forever. The Dream Team had done more than win gold. They had shown the world what happens when competition becomes art. They didn't conquer. They inspired. The game became global, and the world would never again look at basketball, or America, the same way. That was their victory. That was their dream. And for once in human history, it came true exactly as it was imagined. They flew home to a country that already knew the ending but not the meaning. At the airports, people waited with flags and cameras, crowds spilling into runways, waving signs that said simply "Dream Team Forever." They smiled and waved, tired but radiant. Behind the flash of cameras, behind the rehearsed smiles, each of them carried a strange, quiet understanding. They had witnessed the rarest thing of all: perfection. Not as individuals but together. For a few weeks, America lived in the afterglow. Late-night shows replayed highlights like sacred footage. Children in driveways tried to imitate their moves. Shoe sales spiked, posters covered bedrooms, and basketball became more than a game. It became language. At barbershops, at bus stops, in playgrounds, people talked about that team as if they were talking about a movie they'd seen in a dream. Did you see that pass? That dunk? That smile? People who had never watched a game before started watching. The world had changed shape and nobody had planned it. The players went back to their lives, but something followed them. Jordan returned to Chicago and kept winning. He moved through the league like an emperor who had seen the limits of power and found them easy to reach. Magic returned to a different fight, against a disease that frightened the world, and carried himself with the same joy that had made him the heartbeat of that team. Bird retired, his back gone, his mind still sharper than the arcs of his passes. The others scattered. Barkley's jokes filled television studios, Ewing kept working, Malone kept grinding, Stockton kept assisting in silence. They carried the summer with them like sunlight on their skin. The legend grew. Every 4 years, when the Olympic torch burned again, people compared new teams to the Dream Team. The answer was always the same. Close maybe, but never the same. Because that summer wasn't just about dominance, it was about transition. The Cold War had ended, the world was opening. For the first time, people were ready to share something joyful, something universal. The Dream Team gave them that, an art form built on rhythm, courage, and cooperation. Somewhere in Africa, a boy picked up a basketball for the first time. In Eastern Europe, teenagers painted cracked concrete courts with fading red, white, and blue lines. In China, gymnasiums filled with kids practicing layups. In South America, Street corners turned into hoops made of wire and imagination. The game spread faster than any policy, faster than any ideology, carried by satellite broadcasts and human awe. The Dream Team had shown the world a blueprint for greatness. Talent, yes, but also generosity. They passed the ball to each other as if the entire planet were watching, and it was. Years later, when they reunited for documentaries and anniversaries, their hair thinner, their steps slower, they spoke with a kind of disbelief. Magic still laughed, still filled every room he entered. Bird said little. Jordan stared down at the table before speaking. We didn't understand it then, he said, but we were ambassadors. We weren't just playing basketball, we were showing people how to be together. There was a pause after that, the kind of silence that carries gratitude and regret in equal measure. The numbers from Barcelona still live in books. Scores, percentages, margins of victory, but the numbers aren't what matter. What matters is the feeling. The sight of 12 men from different rivalries, cities, and stories moving as one. The sense that, for once, excellence wasn't selfish. The certainty that beauty can come from cooperation as easily as from genius. Sometimes, late at night, Magic said he still dreamt of that court in Barcelona. The light so bright it felt like daylight even indoors. The sound of the crowd blending into a single oceanic roar. The ball leaving his hands, spinning once, twice before finding Jordan's palm. The flash of movement, the lift, the dunk. He'd wake up smiling. Not because of the win, but because of the memory of motion so perfect it seemed divine. The Dream Team became a myth not because they were unbeatable, but because they made everyone watching believe that for a few minutes humanity could be that precise, that joyful, that free. They reminded the world that perfection isn't something to fear or envy. It's something to witness and remember. Decades have passed. New stars came, new records, new scandals. The world moved on, but the footage remains grainy, glowing, eternal. The players younger, the uniforms crisp, the air electric. Every time it plays, for those few seconds, time bends. The ball bounces, the net ripples, and the gods of basketball run again. The echo of their footsteps crosses generations. You can hear it in the silence before every Olympic tip-off, in the hush that falls before the anthem plays, in the whisper that travels through every locker room. Remember Barcelona. And maybe somewhere, under another sun, another group of players will find that same rhythm. Maybe they'll feel what those 12 once felt, that unity, that surrender, that unstoppable joy. And when they do, the world will stand again not to worship, but to understand. Because greatness, once shown, never really leaves. It lingers in memory, in motion, in the simple sound of a basketball hitting hardwood and echoing into forever. That sound is still there. Will always be there. The Dream Team running. And the world still chasing after them. The years turn the footage into scripture. Every time the images played, the layups, the dunks, the laughter, it was as if the world were seeing the game for the first time. The clothes changed, the slang changed, the cities changed, but that summer stayed perfect, untouched. It was a story people told their children to explain what joy looked like when captured on film. People who had never dribbled a ball knew the names, knew the rhythm, knew the shape of those faces under sweat and light. Jordan kept climbing. The world followed him through championships in silence. Magic kept smiling even when the world expected him to fade. Bird retreated to the quiet, content to watch others carry the flame. Barkley became the voice of mischief, a reminder that greatness could also laugh at itself. Each man aged, but in the memory of that team they never did. They remained forever mid-stride, caught in motion, framed by cheers that never stopped. The world they left behind kept echoing them. NBA jerseys appeared in markets in Nairobi, in alleys in Manila, in small towns in Poland. Kids spoke their names in a dozen languages. Coaches from places that had never seen an American flag before built drills based on tapes of the Dream Team. Basketball had become a universal dialect, and the translation was perfect. Energy, respect, and awe. In a way, the Dream Team had built an empire without borders, a kingdom made of courts and hope. Their influence even reached the politics of the era. Diplomats spoke of soft power, of how art and sport could do what speeches couldn't. When foreign leaders met American presidents, they mentioned the team before they mentioned treaties. They spoke of that summer as proof that America could be beautiful when it chose to be generous. In every sense, the Dream Team was the last chapter of a century learning how to share its stage. For the players, the glory mellowed into gratitude. They met again in ceremonies, gray at the temples, heavier around the waist, and smiled at each other with the recognition of soldiers who had survived something impossible. They laughed at the stories that had become folklore, Barkley elbowing his way through defenders, Magic yelling across the court, Bird whispering before sinking another shot. They knew those moments by heart, but each retelling brought back the sound of the ball on wood, the smell of the gym, the pulse of unity that no trophy could reproduce. Sometimes they talked about what it had meant to the world, how basketball had given people a reason to look up. Other times they said nothing because what could be said? There are things language can't hold. The feeling of a pass connecting perfectly, the flash of light under the rim, the crowd roaring not for victory but for the beauty of motion. They had lived it once, that was enough. And yet even now, when the Olympics return and new teams step onto the court, their shadow is there. Every player who wears that jersey knows it. The weight is invisible but real. The Dream Team isn't a record to be broken. It's a question asked again and again: can we still be that good together? Can we still turn competition into art? Somewhere the answer keeps echoing from 1992. Says yes if you believe. Yes if you pass. Yes if you play not to crush but to create. The dream was never about domination. It was about connection. That's why it endures. That's why, when the lights dim after a modern game and the replays roll, you can still feel the same pulse in the crowd. The awe that once swept across Barcelona when 12 men showed the world how beautiful unity could look. The echo fades into the sound of waves against a Mediterranean shore. The city sleeps, the banners are gone, the courts have been rebuilt, the medals rest in glass cases. But somewhere in that quiet between memory and legend, the Dream Team still runs, ghosts of light, sweat, and laughter moving together toward a finish line that never ends. And so the dream kept running, long after the last whistle, long after the medals were stored away and the applause dissolved into time. It ran in slow motion across decades, through screens and stories, through the quiet pride of people who had seen it with their own eyes. It became more than nostalgia. It became a symbol of what happens when talent is guided by purpose and ego bows to art. In the quiet corners of the world, where televisions flickered in black and white, where children shot basketballs through rusted hoops nailed to trees, the images arrived like sunlight. They saw tall men flying, smiling, unafraid. They didn't see countries, they saw possibility. The Dream Team had turned basketball into a mirror where anyone could see themselves reflected. It wasn't America's game anymore, it was everyone's. And that was the real victory. Years passed. New generations picked up the ball, wearing names on their backs that came from those 12 men. The world's talent caught up. The games became closer. Teams that once came only to survive now came to win. And when they did, when the U.S. lost again years later, it wasn't tragedy, it was proof that the dream had worked. The torch had been passed just as it always was meant to be. Each player carried their own version of the story. Jordan would later say that those weeks in Barcelona were the purest basketball he ever played, untouched by money or politics. Magic said it was the most fun he'd ever had on a court. Bird called it closure. Barkley said it was the only time in his life he didn't mind being a role player because every role felt like royalty. They didn't know they were making history, they thought they were just playing ball. But history has a way of revealing itself slowly, like film developing in darkness. The games of Barcelona have a smell, a texture, a sound. The smell of sweat and sunblock, of chalk and asphalt and cologne. The texture of leather and salt, of jerseys damp with effort. The sound of the ball's echo, the cheers blending into ocean waves, the click of cameras recording immortality one frame at a time. You can feel it if you close your eyes, the pulse of a team so in sync it made time hold its breath. In the years that followed, they were honored again and again. Halls of fame, documentaries, retrospectives. And each time as they stood on stages in suits and ties, looking at old footage behind them, the same emotion returned. Gratitude. They had been young once, strong once, perfect once. They had shared something no words could capture. They had seen the summit together and known even then that they would never climb higher. They didn't need to. The mountain itself remembered them. Outside of sports, their legacy took stranger forms. Advertisers learned to speak in images of teamwork and grace. Musicians wrote songs about victory and rhythm and trust. Directors studied the way they moved and borrowed it for their films. The Dream Team became shorthand for excellence, a phrase people used when describing anything that worked flawlessly. You could hear it in offices, in politics, in art. We need a dream team. The meaning lingered, reshaped, but always traced back to those 12 men who turned motion into myth. And still, in small gyms and empty courts, that echo continues. A child in Manila throws a ball too high and smiles when it falls through. A teenager in Johannesburg dribbles until his palms blister. A coach in Croatia teaches passing with reverence. None of them were alive in 1992, yet somehow they know. They've seen the footage. They've felt the pulse. It's in every shot taken with hope, every pass made with trust. It's in the belief that sport at its best isn't about winning, it's about finding harmony between strangers, about creating something so precise and generous that the crowd forgets to breathe. That's what the Dream Team gave the world. Not just victories but a template for wonder. They showed that greatness doesn't have to divide, it can unite. They proved that art and strength can live in the same heartbeat. And they left behind a silence so full it still hums. Decades later, when the lights dim after another Olympic final, and a new generation of players stands at center court, someone will always say the same words softly, almost like a prayer. Remember 1992. And for a moment, everyone does. The noise fades. The air sharpens. The memory returns. 12 figures moving together through time, unstoppable, eternal. That's the dream. It never ended. It just keeps passing hand to hand across the world. Sometimes when people speak about that summer, they lower their voices without realizing it, as if they're in the presence of something sacred. They talk about how the air in the arena felt heavier, how the crowd didn't just cheer but vibrated, how there was a strange calm between possessions, like everyone knew they were watching something that wouldn't come again. They remember the sound of the ball and the hum of the lights. They remember the way Jordan's eyes fixed on the rim, the way Magic pointed and laughed, the way Bird stood still, a ghost commanding space without moving. These aren't memories anymore. They're rites, told and retold until they become part of the culture itself. The footage still looks alive. The uniforms glow in colors that belong to another time. The deep navy, the bright white, the red that caught the sun. The court shimmers with heat. You can freeze any frame and find a story in it, a smile, a hand on a shoulder, a crowd rising to its feet. It's proof that beauty doesn't age. It just changes resolution. Every few years, someone tries to rebuild the magic. They gather stars, champions, prodigies, and send them out under the same flag. And every time, before the first tip-off, journalists ask if this will be the next dream team. The players smile politely. They know the answer. It's impossible to repeat something that was never about dominance in the first place. The magic wasn't in the score. It was in the collision of timing and meaning, the end of one century's arrogance and the birth of another's connection. Back then, the world still believed in symbols. The Dream Team became one. They were a promise that excellence could coexist with joy, that unity didn't have to be forced, that perfection could be generous. People in countries recovering from war watched them and saw hope. People in nations just beginning to believe in themselves saw direction. For a few weeks, basketball explained humanity better than any speech ever could. Years later, the same players would meet children who told them their lives had changed because of those games. Some had become professionals. Others had just found a reason to get up in the morning. One man in Eastern Europe said he remembered watching from a broken TV that flickered out halfway through the second quarter. He didn't see the ending, but it didn't matter. The part he saw was enough. It had made him believe the world could be brighter than the one he lived in. And that's the thing about moments like this. They belong to everyone. The Dream Team never knew who was watching, never knew which child in which country was holding their breath at the sight of them. They didn't need to know. The magic of that team wasn't in their awareness of the stage, it was in their total surrender to the game. They didn't perform. They played. The cameras caught it. The world translated it. The meaning arrived later. Now, when you stand in the empty stadium in Barcelona where it all happened, you can still feel the pulse in the walls. The seats are different, the logos have changed, but the air remembers. Late in the afternoon, when the light slants through the high windows, you can almost see them. The silhouettes, the movement, the rhythm that made the world look up and remember what human grace looks like when it moves. If you close your eyes, the roar comes back, faint but endless. The bounce of the ball, the whistle, the explosion of a dunk, the laughter on the bench. It feels close enough to touch. And then it fades, leaving behind the same lesson it always carried. That for a brief, golden moment, 12 men made perfection look effortless, and by doing so, made it possible for everyone else to believe in something again. They didn't build monuments. They didn't need to. Their monument is every court in every city where someone still picks up a ball and starts to dream. Their anthem is every cheer that rises from a playground, every echo of sneakers on concrete, every breath held before a shot falls through. The Dream Team's story isn't in the past. It's in motion, looping through time like a perfect pass that never stops traveling. The ball is still moving. The game is still going. The world is still watching. And somewhere beyond language and distance and decades, the dream keeps playing on. And when night falls over the world's courts, in the small cities and big ones alike, that echo lingers, the soft slap of rubber on concrete, the laughter of kids pretending they're taller, faster, braver than they are. They shout the same names that once filled arenas, and the sound crosses oceans. In those moments, the Dream Team is reborn again and again, not as faces on posters but as rhythm, energy, and faith in what people can do together. For those who were there, that memory never really faded. They describe it as sunlight that never went out. The smell of sweat and chalk, the hum of television cables, the way time seemed to pause between passes. They remember small things too. Magic's laugh cutting through the tension, Jordan tying his shoes in silence, Barkley joking with the press, Bird stretching his back in the locker room before walking out like a man going to church. Every detail became sacred because it was real, unpolished, human. Time gave the story a new kind of weight. What was once spectacle became scripture. The team's faces appeared on stamps, murals, video games. Commentators still mention them with a kind of reverence, like saints of movement. And every new champion, every rising star, carries a bit of that inheritance whether they mean to or not. It's in the way they move, the way they smile after a perfect play, the way they hug their opponents when the game ends. The Dream Team set the tone for how greatness should look: confident but kind, competitive but generous, proud but graceful. Somewhere deep in the archives of sports history, there's footage that hasn't been aired in years, gritty handheld clips of those practices in San Diego. No fans, no anthems, just sneakers squeaking and voices echoing in an empty gym. The players shouting, arguing, laughing. Watching it feels like watching a forge at work. You see the sparks of something becoming steel. You see why that team mattered. It wasn't the medals, it was the chemistry. They wanted to beat each other badly, but they also wanted to make each other better. And that's the paradox of their greatness. They competed until cooperation became inevitable. The world that watched them has changed. Borders have shifted, music has changed, and the game itself has evolved. But when the Olympics come around, the same feeling creeps in. Crowds still hold their breath during the anthem. Kids still watch, wide-eyed, waiting for that one play that will make them believe in magic again. And somewhere inside that collective heartbeat, the ghost of 1992 still moves. There's an image people remember, one that never gets old. 12 men standing together, arms around each other's shoulders, the flag rising behind them. The stadium bright as morning. It's the photograph of a century that briefly believed in itself. That image doesn't age because it isn't about time. It's about what people look like when they stand perfectly together. Years later, when those men became fathers and grandfathers, they sometimes caught themselves watching their children play, laughing at how the world keeps turning. They'd see the familiar shapes, the jump shot, the dribble, the burst of speed, and smile. The game had moved on, but the language was the same. Maybe that's what they'd given the world. A language made of rhythm and courage, spoken without words, passed from generation to generation. In that sense, the Dream Team never ended. It just spread out, 12 sparks scattered across history, lighting thousands of others. Each player became a different kind of messenger. Jordan showed what discipline could build. Magic showed what joy could heal. Bird showed what pain could endure. Barkley showed what humor could carry. The others filled in the spaces between, proving that greatness doesn't belong to one shape or story. So when you watch those old clips, don't just see the dunks and the scores. See the trust. See the harmony. See what it looks like when competition turns into collaboration. That's what they gave us. That's what endures. Because the dream was never just about basketball. It was about humanity at its best. Moving together, sharing light, showing what can happen when no one holds anything back. And somewhere in that endless motion they're still playing. The court has no boundaries now. The crowd is the world. The lights never dim. The ball keeps bouncing, echoing into forever. And that sound, the echo of the ball hitting the floor, steady as a heartbeat, becomes the pulse of the world itself. It threads through decades, through headphones and highlight reels, through the laughter of friends playing under dim streetlights. It belongs to everyone now. The dream team doesn't exist in the past. It lives in motion, in every jump, every reach, every breath drawn before a shot. It's a promise that humans, when they move together with purpose, can make something so perfect it outlasts them. People who were there remember the sunlight on the court in Barcelona, that Mediterranean gold spilling through the windows. They remember the sound of languages colliding in the stands, the smell of salt in the air, the hum of cameras. They remember the calm before the first game, when all those egos stood in silence and felt something rare, total unity. In that silence, before the whistle, they became more than individuals. They became a single rhythm. Jordan would later say that was the only time he ever felt that kind of stillness. Magic said it felt like electricity waiting to explode. Bird said nothing. He just nodded, the way he always did when words weren't enough. They stepped out, the whistle blew, and time opened up around them. Every motion looked inevitable, as if the court itself had been waiting for them all along. The crowd saw it too. They saw how the game became poetry. They saw how passes turned into sentences, how movement became grammar, how each player finished the other's thought. It wasn't about crushing opponents. It was about the joy of seeing something done right. It was a kind of grace rarely seen in the modern world, pure, selfless, and beautiful. Long after, when technology made it possible to slow those moments down frame by frame, analysts tried to explain it, angles, physics, statistics. But the truth was simpler. It worked because they trusted each other. Every man on that court had spent a lifetime being the star, the leader, the one. But in Barcelona they gave that up for something larger. They didn't chase points. They chased rhythm. And in that rhythm they found freedom. Years passed and the world grew noisier. The game changed. The cameras multiplied. But whenever anyone spoke of perfection, the same images returned. The red, white, and blue, the laughter, the applause that felt endless. They had built something no rulebook could define. A moment when excellence made sense of the chaos. When the players meet now, gray-haired and slower, they talk softly. They laugh about the jet lag, the crowds, the heat. They remember the arguments in practice, the pranks, the bus rides with music playing too loud. But beneath the laughter is always the same quiet awe, a recognition that they touched something infinite. They don't brag about it. They just share it like people remembering a shared dream. And that's what it was, a dream, but not the kind you wake from. A dream you carry with you, that changes how you see the world. The dream team showed that perfection wasn't sterile or cold. It was alive, playful, generous. It was the sound of 12 hearts beating in time. If you go to Barcelona now, you can still stand on that court. The seats have been replaced, the paint redone, but the air remembers. Sometimes tourists walk in, stand at center court, and close their eyes. For a moment they can almost hear it. The cheers, the squeak of shoes, the roar of joy when the impossible looked easy. And maybe if they listen closely they'll feel it too, that strange mix of pride and peace that filled the world in the summer of 1992. Because that's what the dream team left behind. Not just trophies or highlights, but a feeling. A reminder that human beings, even with all their flaws and differences, can still create something flawless together. For a few weeks they did. For a few weeks they made the world stop fighting and start watching. For a few weeks they showed us what harmony looks like when it wears sneakers and sweat. And so the story keeps running, not on paper, not in film, but in every person who's ever picked up a ball and believed that movement could mean something. The dream goes on, not trapped in the past but alive in every court, every sunrise game, every echo that refuses to fade. And when you really listen to that echo, when you strip away the nostalgia and the noise, what remains is something simple. The sound of people being better together than they could ever be alone. That was the truth hidden inside the Dream Team's perfection. It wasn't the dominance that mattered, it was the cooperation. 12 men who had spent their lives as rivals, each the center of their own universe, surrendered to something larger. And in doing so they revealed a small secret about greatness. It's not about being the best. It's about belonging to the best moment. People still chase that moment. They chase it in business, in music, in film, in any place where teamwork demands both humility and pride. They call their projects dream teams, without realizing what that phrase costs. The Dream Team of 1992 wasn't built on comfort. It was built on collision. Every practice was a small war of wills, a battle fought without hatred, only hunger. They challenged each other so fiercely that harmony became the only escape. That's why the games looked effortless, because the work had already been done behind closed doors, in silence, in sweat. When they stepped on the court in Barcelona, they carried all those small battles with them. You could see it in the way they moved, each man giving just enough space, just enough trust. That balance, fragile as light, held through every pass, every dunk, every smile. It was a masterpiece not of control, but of faith. Faith is what lingers now. Faith that people can rise above ego, even for a moment. Faith that joy can be stronger than rivalry. Faith that art can appear in the most unlikely places. A basketball court, a summer afternoon, a breath between whistles. The Dream Team gave that faith to the world, and the world has been holding on to it ever since. In the years that followed, as the NBA became global, as names from Serbia, Spain, Argentina, Nigeria began to fill rosters, the echoes of that faith spread. Every international player who steps into an American arena carries a thread of Barcelona with them. They're part of the chain that started there, when the game ceased to belong to one nation and became the language of many. Sometimes people say that sport doesn't matter. But it's moments like that summer that prove them wrong. It mattered because it showed what people look like when they meet the highest expectations and find grace instead of arrogance. It mattered because it gave a generation something to believe in when the world was tired of conflict. It mattered because, for once, excellence felt kind. The film rolls, the tape hums, the image flickers. The camera pans over the court, the flag rising, the players shoulder to shoulder. The crowd is one sound, one heartbeat. You can't tell who's cheering for whom because in that instant they're all cheering for the same thing. It's not victory they're celebrating, it's beauty. Pure, undeniable human beauty. Years later, one of the players said, "We didn't change basketball. Basketball changed us." Maybe that's the truest thing ever said about them. Because in that brief, golden intersection of competition and communion, they touched something sacred. They carried that touch with them afterward into their lives, their families, their stories. And the world, without realizing it, carried it too. Now, when a kid in some faraway place picks up a ball for the first time and starts to dribble, the sound is the same. The rhythm is the same. The hope is the same. The dream still moving, still passing, still alive. And somewhere in the blur of time, the lines between past and present dissolve. The court becomes every court. The sound becomes every echo. The faces change, the jerseys evolve, but the energy remains the same. It's the same vibration that hummed through Barcelona's air that summer of 1992, the heartbeat of the game when it becomes something larger than sport, larger than pride, larger even than victory. You can almost see it when the camera pans slowly across the faces of the crowd, people from 100 countries, their flags forgotten for a moment, eyes lifted not to a symbol but to a feeling. They weren't cheering for America that night. They were cheering for possibility itself. They were cheering for the realization that the human body, when united with other bodies in rhythm and trust, can become something eternal. The Dream Team gave them that moment and it never left. It rippled outward, across oceans and generations, until it became legend. But legends, when you look closely, are built from small human moments. The way Magic called everyone brother. The way Barkley joked after hard fouls to keep the court from boiling. The way Jordan stayed silent until the game began, then spoke only in movement. The way Bird, hurting and pale, still showed up early every morning to stretch, to pass, to teach. The way every one of them, for all their ego, their fame, their fire, found joy in seeing someone else score. That was the secret. It wasn't about who dunked, who shot, who led. It was about what they created together. Something as simple, as fragile, and as timeless as balance. When you watch the old footage now, the colors slightly faded, the corners soft, it feels like a dream, not because of what happened but because of what it meant. You see Jordan flying and you understand flight differently. You see Magic smiling and it feels like permission to be happy again. You see 12 men who could have tried to outshine one another, and instead they share the light. After the games ended, the medals were placed in drawers, the jerseys framed, the courts cleaned. The reporters moved on to new headlines, the world went back to its noise. But the echo stayed. It stayed in every child who dribbled a ball on a cracked playground. It stayed in every athlete who realized that perfection isn't a wall, it's a bridge. It stayed in the quiet knowledge that, once in a small span of days, humans did something perfectly right. The years folded over it like layers of film, but the light still shines through. Every Olympics, when new players walk onto the court, they feel it, that invisible pressure, that whisper from the past. They may not say it out loud, but they know, this is sacred ground. This is where the dream began. And in the crowd, there are always older faces who remember. They sit a little straighter when the anthem plays. They smile when the ball rises for the first tip. They remember being young when the world first saw what it looked like to move in perfect time. Because that's what the dream team really was. Not dominance, not even genius, but timing. The right people, in the right place, in the right moment, moving together until even gravity seemed to hesitate. History will keep writing about them, keep counting the scores, keep listing the names. But the truth of it will always be beyond language. The truth is in that silence before a pass connects. In the space between dribble and leap. In the heartbeat of the crowd. That's where the dream team still lives. Not in memory but in movement. Not in the past, but in every instant where excellence meets joy. And if you listen, really listen, you can still hear it. The ball. The breath. The rhythm. The dream still running. Some nights, when the arenas are empty and the lights are off, you can almost hear them. The faint echo of sneakers, the rhythm of the dribble, the murmur of laughter from men who no longer have to prove anything. You can feel the air vibrate with a kind of memory, the kind that doesn't fade because it never belonged to one time. It belonged to everyone who ever believed in something bigger than themselves. That's the real ending of the Dream Team story. Not the medals, not the scores, not even the perfection of those games. The real ending is that it never ended. It moved into the bloodstream of the world and stayed there, beating quietly through every new generation that picks up the ball and begins again. Michael Jordan, looking back decades later, once said that the thing he remembered most wasn't the games. It was the silence right before them, the feeling that every man in that room understood what they were about to do. He said it felt like being inside a storm before it broke, like standing on the edge of something eternal. Magic said he had never seen so many great players so happy just to share the same air. Bird said it was the only time he ever played without pain. Barkley said, "It was the most fun I ever had being serious." They weren't chasing records. They were living a moment. And the moment, by some miracle, didn't fade. It stayed suspended in the world's memory like a note held too long in a song that never ends. Decades rolled by. The world changed. The cameras became sharper, the crowds louder, the stories shorter. But the footage from Barcelona still glows. It doesn't feel old, it feels timeless. When it plays, it's as if the dust of years lifts and light pours through. You watch and you remember what it felt like when the world seemed simple, when greatness felt kind, when unity wasn't a slogan but a rhythm that people could move to. And maybe that's why it still matters. Because every era needs proof that people can do something together perfectly. Every generation needs an image of harmony strong enough to survive disappointment. The Dream Team gave us that image. They showed us that competition doesn't have to divide, that excellence doesn't have to humiliate, that power can be graceful. They showed us what we could look like at our best. Their legacy isn't a banner hanging in a gym. It's the way the game itself changed shape. The way basketball became a shared language, a bridge between countries that once barely spoke to each other. They turned a sport into a global dialect, and with it they taught a lesson that outlived the scores. Greatness, real greatness, is contagious. Go to any playground now. The sun's low, the air thick with summer heat, the rim crooked, the ball scuffed. Listen. You'll hear laughter in a dozen languages. You'll see hands raised for high fives. You'll see someone wearing a jersey they bought years ago, its letters faded, its number still visible. And somewhere in those small, ordinary moments, the dream team is alive again, not as heroes on pedestals but as motion, as joy, as proof. That's the miracle of legacy. You can't contain it. You can only pass it on. Maybe someday the tapes will fade completely, the paper will crumble, the names will blur into history books. But the idea, the rhythm, the unity, the grace, that will remain. Because once a thing like that exists, the world can't forget how it felt. And when the next generation steps onto their court, wherever that court may be, a polished Olympic arena or a cracked slab of concrete behind a school, they'll feel it too. The heartbeat of a summer when the world stopped to watch a handful of men play as if the world itself depended on beauty. The heartbeat of the dream. The ball leaves a hand, arcs through the air, falls through the net. The sound is soft, final, eternal. The camera pans out. The court fades into the horizon. The voices of the crowd dissolve into the wind. And what remains is the echo. An echo that says, "We were here. We played together. We showed you what it could look like. Now it's your turn." The dream was never theirs alone. It was always meant to be shared. And so it runs on, through light and time and memory. The dream team, forever moving, forever shining, forever alive.